The world thought it knew them. The fans, the media, even the casual observers. They had painted a picture of Lee Min-ho and Kim Go-eun together, smiling, laughing, sharing the kind of moments that felt untouchable. They believed in the story of two stars whose chemistry was more than professional, a love story played out in the light of cameras and public appearances. But what the world didn't see was always more complicated. Behind closed doors, where no camera could follow, where no editor could control the narrative, there existed another world. A world that was private, raw, and sometimes unrecognizable even to those who shared it. It started subtly. A lingering look here, a quiet disagreement there. Fans speculated endlessly over photos, interpreting smiles as happiness, glances as longing. Yet behind the glamour, the truth was quiet, almost invisible, until one incident forced it into the open. The first signs appeared months before the public noticed. Schedules were tight, shoots dragged on, and the long hours of fame became a silent thief of intimacy. Messages went unanswered. Calls were delayed. And yet, they still stood together in front of cameras, perfect and polished like nothing had changed. But the cracks were widening. Those closest to them whispered of nights spent apart, of arguments that escalated in the shadows, and of decisions made without the other's knowledge. What the media would eventually call a shocking revelation was, for them, the slow erosion of trust. Behind closed doors, Lee Min-ho and Kim Go-eun were not the idealized couple the world adored. They were human, conflicted, and vulnerable. When the news finally broke, the public reaction was instantaneous. Headlines screamed, social media erupted, and fans around the world were divided. Some blamed misunderstandings. Others demanded explanations. But very few understood the real story, because the real story had nothing to do with scandals or tabloid rumors. It had to do with exhaustion, ambition, and the delicate fragility of love under the constant glare of fame. Lee Min-ho, accustomed to the expectations of millions, had made choices he thought were necessary. Decisions about his career, his projects, his reputation. Things he believed would protect the future, not destroy the present. But those decisions came at a cost. Kim Go-eun, who had given her heart so freely, found herself facing silence where there had once been laughter, absence where there had once been warmth. When the public finally saw it, the leaked message, the whispered conversation, the unseen moment caught on film, shock swept across every screen. Fans replayed every clip, searched every post, and tried to reconcile the image they adored with the reality that had always existed. Behind closed doors, the apology came too late. The words he wished he had said months earlier, the confessions, the admissions, the I'm sorries, arrived after the moment had passed. She had grown accustomed to the silence, had found strength in the absence, and had learned that waiting for someone else's recognition often only prolongs your own suffering. And yet, despite the heartbreak, there was still care. Even in those moments of tension and misunderstanding, they had not stopped loving entirely. They had simply learned that love is not always enough to survive the pressures of a world that watches too closely, judges too quickly, and never gives space for mistakes. The public couldn't see the late nights where he lingered by her side in quiet moments, hoping to bridge gaps that felt too wide. They couldn't see her retreating to a safe space, reflecting on every choice, every word, and every gesture that had led them to this point. No one could witness the small acts of tenderness that were hidden from the cameras, the notes passed in private, the subtle glances that said more than words ever could. And then came the moment that changed everything. A simple disagreement over a scheduling conflict escalated into something bigger than either had anticipated. Miscommunication, exhaustion, and pride collided. For a fleeting second, the image of the perfect couple shattered completely. What had once been playful teasing became tension. What had once been understanding became distance. The leak that followed did not help. Messages meant to stay private, conversations meant to remain behind closed doors, suddenly appeared online. The public read them, dissected them, and drew conclusions that were only partially true. Fans were heartbroken. Critics were relentless, and in the eye of the storm, Lee Min-ho and Kim Go-eun were forced to navigate not only their own emotions, but the expectations and judgments of millions. Yet even amid the chaos, there were moments of reflection. Late at night, when the world was quiet, they both considered what they had lost, what they had risked, and what still mattered. It was in those moments, the ones no one would ever see, that the depth of their bond became clear. They were learning, painfully and slowly, that love under scrutiny is never simple. That fame magnifies everything, the joys, the mistakes, the silences. That sometimes the most intimate moments are the ones no one ever witnesses. She realized that forgiveness doesn't mean erasing pain. It doesn't mean forgetting the nights of confusion or the moments of hurt. It simply means acknowledging that two people can care deeply for each other while also making choices that hurt. He realized that apology is only meaningful when paired with understanding. It's not the words themselves that heal, but the actions that follow. And he understood, finally, that some wounds are invisible, yet no less real. When the public frenzy subsided, when headlines faded, and when hashtags trended no longer, the two were left with something far more valuable than public approval. They were left with clarity. Clarity about themselves, about each other, about the fragile balance between love and responsibility. The fans would continue to debate, to speculate, to relive every moment. But behind closed doors, Lee Min-ho and Kim Go-eun had begun to reconstruct the boundaries of their relationship. They were no longer defined by the spotlight, by viral videos, or by the expectations of millions. They were defined by honesty, introspection, and the quiet resilience that comes from surviving heartbreak in a world that refuses to look away. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't even a reunion. It was something more subtle, more powerful. It was recognition. Recognition that love can exist even when imperfect. Recognition that mistakes do not erase care. Recognition that sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones that never reach an audience. For Lee Min-ho, it meant taking responsibility without expecting accolades. For Kim Go-eun, it meant protecting herself without guilt. And together, it meant redefining what it meant to care, even when circumstances forced distance. The world would continue to watch, continue to comment, and continue to guess. But behind closed doors, beyond the cameras, beyond the headlines, they had found a fragile equilibrium. A place where they could exist not as idols, not as public property, but as two people who had shared something real. In time, the headlines would fade completely. Photos would be forgotten, and the public might never know what truly happened behind the closed doors of their lives. But they did, and that was enough. Love, after all, doesn't need an audience. Forgiveness doesn't require applause. Healing doesn't wait for validation.